The relentless attacks on our coal industry by politicians, green activists and well-meaning, but I've got to tell you, uninformed citizens is a threat to our country and our way of life. No amount of wishing facts would disappear will negate the importance of coal to our energy, our export and our employment figures. And that's the topic for our talking points tonight. And here to help me go through them is political strategist Brigid Meney. Brigid, thanks so much for joining me. I appreciate you taking time out of the start of your weekend, but let's get straight into it. First talking point, the coal industry directly employs around 50,000 workers and it supports another 120,000 indirect jobs. Many of these are in important regional communities. If the zealots get their way and we close down the coal industry, what are these people going to be doing?
Oh, absolutely. I consider myself quite neutral on minerals. I'm like most young people, we all want a greener future. But 50,000 jobs can't just be collateral damage in our quest for this, greener future. And what I see is that's so frivolous in kind of these anti-mining activists, which seems to be becoming worryingly more politically mainstream talk, is that, they want to demonise professionals daring to take a job in this industry and provide for their families and earn a living. And, there's a lot of jobs changing in the mining sector as things become more automated and things become more remote operated. And I totally understand that. Things change, professional jobs change, skills change. So I'm with them on that. But, I go to mining conferences. I have been spat at, abused, said that I've had blood on my hands from thousands of people for daring to show my face. And I don't even work in the coal mining industry. I'm just, part of the mining industry. So they don't do themselves any favours, these anti-coal mining activists. They really just try to slander a whole heap of people in the process.
Yeah, they don't do themselves any favours. And I think you've made a good point that a lot of us are environmentalists. We want to protect and preserve the environment for future generations. Any parent sees they want a better future for their children, both financially and in an environmental sense. But we need coal. We need coal to pay for all the things, and we're going to get onto that in so many of these other points, because talking point number 2 here, coal exports deliver around $70 billion every year in export revenue, and the coal industry pays over $6 billion in royalties every single year. $70 billion in export revenues, $6 billion in royalties. How are we going to replace that? We can't exactly ship solar power overseas or wind power overseas, particularly when half the time it's not sunny or the wind is not blowing. What's their response to that, Brigid?
Well, absolutely. And it's even more, localised than that. There are entire communities that rely on this industry, and there are states that their economy is underpinned by this industry. And, in New South Wales alone, in terms of value, it's $23 billion of export, which is, greater than, even before COVID, greater than the tourism industry, greater than the education industry, which receives a lot more perks and support sometimes from activists and industries and government. So, I don't think people realise the gravity of the export industry that coal provides, even at a local level or at a state level. And we've seen that support the economy throughout COVID as well, when other industries were flailing.
Yeah, and when you've got a New South Wales Labor Energy Minister in Matt Keane appointing Malcolm Turnbull to a board and trying to turn the whole state into a woke version of California, an even woker version of California, I should say, you know that some politicians have just lost the plot. But let's talk about electricity generation for just a moment. You may have heard what I was talking about with Ian Plimer before. Australia's electricity is almost totally reliant on fossil fuels, and that's mostly coal. According to the Australian Energy Update, 60% of our electricity is generated by coal, 21% by gas. So it's 4/5 by coal and gas. Solar is just 5% and wind is just 6%. So let's phase coal out, which is what the Greenies want to do. How are we going to power anything in this country? We just simply do not have the capacity to do so without fossil fuels, most especially coal.
Well, I think, I'm going to disagree a little bit here, because the lack of, diversification really does concern me. I think we're wind and solar and all those unreliable other things are another matter entirely. But, diversification and that sole reliance on coal, it doesn't necessarily need to be that way. But what you'll find in anti-coal activists is that they're really just anti-mining activists masquerading, behind coal. And whichever way you look at it, that if we want real diversification, then, if we aren't using, digging up coal to create wind farms, then we're, mining lithium to create batteries or mining uranium for a potential nuclear industry. So whichever way you look at it, mining is involved in that diversification, and these mining activists actually really undermine that cause and really weaken, our energy sector because of it.
Yeah. Yeah, Brigid, I'm glad you made a point that you disagree with me, because I celebrate disagreement. If people have a different point of view, they can. And diversity is celebrated on this show, just like it is in our electricity generation. But I simply can't get past the fact that 60% on coal. If you want to get rid of it tomorrow, and they want to blow up the next coal-fired power, the last one, as soon as they possibly can, like they have here in South Australia, how will we replace it? I just don't see the answer, because it's certainly not right now in solar or batteries or wind. And we know that batteries, of course, are mined by child slaves in the Congo, thanks to Ian Plimer. So there's a moral justification as too. Let's move on, and it's about politics. Our politicians, this is talking point number 4, our politicians slavishly obey the energy and climate dictates of the socialist-led United Nations. And yet, since 2000, the world has doubled its coal-fired power capacity. 1,600 new plants are planned or under construction in 62 countries, and Australia is not one of them. New plants planned include 24 in South Africa, 93 in Turkey, 26 in South Korea, 45 in Japan, and 1,171 in China. Now, China's apparently the pin-up people for environmentalism, according to the left, and human rights as well. So they're building 1,171 new coal-fired power plants. Why can't Australia have at least one more?
Look, I think that, at some point we've just got to let, South Korea and South Africa and all these other countries do what they want to do, whatever works for them, and let the UN finger wag where they want to finger wag. I mean, people are picking and choosing what they want to subscribe to all the time from the UN anyway, so what does it matter? And I think at some point we've actually just got to say, well, what's in Australia's best interest here? So, I like to take our examples a bit closer to home and look at, South Australia and Hazelwood and, the spikes in energy costs that we saw after that, the unemployment that we've seen, up to, 2 years after, closing that. And if we really seriously want to move to, get rid of these unviable coal-fired power plants, then, we've actually got to plan it a little bit better or brainstorm it a little bit longer. I mean, they gave 5 months notice in Hazelwood and didn't expect that there would be any repercussions, employment or energy price-wise. Like, it's just madness.
Yeah, it's crazy. The state premier here in South Australia, who was opposition leader at the time, celebrated the destruction of our last coal-fired power station and started hugging windmills. And since then, our electricity grid has got worse and worse and worse. And you make a good point. We've got to do what's in our national interest. And that brings me to talking point number 5. As Australia pursues the green dream, it pays on average 25 US cents per kilowatt hour. Now, I've priced it in US cents because that's the international comparison. It's among the highest in the world. The Chinese and the Indians pay around 8 cents per kilowatt hour. Turkey, 9 cents. Russia, 6 cents. South Africa, 13 cents. The USA, 15 cents. And Singapore, 19 cents per kilowatt hour. The fact that we pay more than a country like Singapore, which has no natural resources, is an absolute indictment on those responsible for managing and the transition, if you want to call it that, or for creating the mess that our electricity system has become. Why, Brigid, are we subject to among the most expensive power prices anywhere in the world, and we've got the most abundant supplies of energy almost anywhere in the world? Well,
I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent here, because most of the countries that you mentioned actually have, on some scale, a nuclear energy industry. And it baffles me continuously that in a country that has one of the, largest known deposits of uranium being in South Australia, and that's just in South Australia where we're legally actually able to explore, not, counting all the other states where we're not allowed to look into it, why we can't get a decent conversation among, politicians and government officials alike around, that nuclear cycle and where we might be able to participate to bring prices down. I mean, we dig up our uranium and export it to Paris, and they won't, mine it there, but they'll buy it from us. And the whole thing's just, ridiculous. And I really just think that, with all the professional capabilities we have in the uranium industry already in Australia, it has become time for a serious conversation outside of, a couple of fast politicised inquiries that we saw over the last few years.
Yeah, hear to that. Brigid Meney, thank you so much for spending some time with us. You go and enjoy the weekend ahead of you. And
thank you.
I'll see you again in a couple of weeks here on Bernardi.
See you then.